Hi everyone. The purpose of this video is to review the sample exploratory essay. By now you may have seen a video from me explaining the actual assignment. It's just a few minutes long, and you know that assignment is in the exploratory essay handout. So here is a sample. Notice if we're going to pay attention to the super tiny details, with this heading, there are a couple different ways to do a heading. This one is fine. If you've learned another MLA heading, that's fine. I don't really care about that right now. This has a nice specific title. Notice if you're going to pay attention to formatting, how this is all double spaced with no extra spacing in there. So it looks really nice. All right. So the first thing you might notice is this word I. Some of you may have had it drilled into you that you should never say I in formal writing. And obviously, from the sample, you can see that that is not such a hard and fast rule. In fact, there might be really good reasons to use the pronoun I in an essay. And in this case, I think this writer is doing it effectively using a personal anecdote as an attention getter. I like this. So it's okay to use I in my class. Always with writing, you want to evaluate your purpose and audience carefully. So notice how this student is setting up the argument with a personal anecdote and the idea that a lot of people just do not like homework. However, this concern is nothing new, and this leads into the debate here, the debate about homework. Notice that this student is giving us some historical context for this debate and spends the rest of the introduction explaining this debate and then identifying what this paper will be about. While research has cast doubt on the effect of homework on students' academic success, many educators insist it is a necessary part of their homework or of their curriculum. So in other words, this paper is going to be about whether homework is good or bad. The second obvious thing you might notice about this paper is the highlighting. So since this is a little bit distracting, before we talk about the format, I want to talk about the use of sources in this paper. Everything from this Harris Cooper source is yellow. Everything from this Maltese tie and fan source is this mauve pinkish color. And then everything from the Graham source is green. So you can see how in one paragraph, all three sources are used. We don't simply spend one paragraph summarizing one source and then the next paragraph summarizing another source, but instead, this writer is drawing connections between sources and showing how they all work to show some of the concerns about homework over the years. Okay, this paragraph also uses two different sources. Okay, and then if you look at the works cited list, you can see that Cooper source is here, the Graham source is here, and the Maltese et al. Source is here. So the colors in the text correspond with the colors on this list. I've already mentioned in the previous video that it's okay if your MLA works cited list isn't perfectly formatted yet. If you have never learned how to do one, just do your best and we'll those later. But the most important thing is that every source cited in your paper is on this list. And then these sources are in alphabetical order, so it's really easy to find them because, of course, your paper is not going to have the color coding that's just done for the sample. Okay, notice that this source comes from EBSCOhost, so this meets the requirement to have at least one source from a library database. Here too is another one, and then this source is a online news magazine article. Okay, so you can use any kind of resource you want to help you with MLA citation. If you want to use the OneSearch citation tools that are provided within the databases, or one of those easybib.com type sources, feel free to do that. But you could also use the handout that I've posted called Nuts and Bolts Writing Guide. So as long as we've been talking about sources, I want to look at how well this writer does a few things. First of all, always the quotations are really nicely introduced. She's got a lead-in. In this case, according to psychology professor Harris Cooper, this debate has followed a regular pattern, and she connects with a colon her quotation to the lead-in. Okay, that shows, the colon shows, I'm going to prove what I just said. Notice also that she tells us who Harris Cooper is. You guys have noticed in discussions how important it is to pay attention to the credentials of your authors. This writer is telling us here that Harris Cooper is to be trusted on this topic because he's a psychology professor. So that little acknowledgement of a source's credentials can be a great way to introduce your quotation. Okay, then we've got the exact words here in quotation marks, followed by the page number and a period. Okay, now we know who Harris Cooper is, so now the next time she cites him, she doesn't need to remind us that he's a psychology professor. Notice how she's got some nice lead in here building up into the quotation, so it flows smoothly with her own writing. Oops. Again, another thing that I want to point out about this is how she uses multiple sources in some of her paragraphs, right? So she's showing where there are connections between sources. In this example, she doesn't have a quotation from Graham. She's using an idea from Graham, so she's still giving him credit. So again, whether you're quoting or paraphrasing or summarizing, always tell us where the material came from, because you don't want to plagiarize and you want to look credible. Here's another great example of how to introduce a source by giving us the credentials. As Stanford researcher Denise Pope put it, now you might remember that Pope isn't on the works cited list because the writer got Pope in Graham. So if you've watched my MLA citation video, you remember this, right? This indicates that Graham quoted Pope, that the writer got Pope from Graham. So Pope was quoted in Graham. Okay, so I think you get the feel for these citations. Remember, if the author's name isn't introduced in the lead-in, you have to provide it in the citation at the end. But if you provide it in the lead-in, you don't need to repeat it. The most important thing is that your reader should always be able to trace any information in your paper to the works cited list. That way you're not plagiarizing, and that way you are showing how credible you are by supporting your claims. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this paper is the wonderful structure. This is a 5-paragraph essay, but not in that predictable way that you learned in middle school, where the first reason that blah, blah, blah is. Instead, it's a little more sophisticated than that. Notice that this writer has nice, clear topic sentences at the beginning of the sentences. And then also tends to wrap up with a return sentence at the end. Overall, if we look at homework strictly from a viewpoint of its impact on learning, there does not seem to be compelling evidence for assigning it. This is a really interesting paragraph because it begins with the idea that homework has benefits, but it begins to challenge it and to show that the effect of homework on achievement is trivial. So most of this paragraph focuses on the problems with homework. They will end up learning incorrect information, it can be exacerbated, and then we've got this nice wrap-up sentence. Look at this nice transition. Besides the age of the students, it's also key to look at both the type and quantity of homework. So now we know what this paragraph is going to be about. We've got this really nice transition from the last paragraph, and then weaving that into what this current paragraph will be about, the type and quantity of work. And the rest of this paragraph is about that. Again, remember that all this highlighting is not necessarily quotation, because that would be much too much quotation. Most of the words should be your own. So this writer is doing a good job of summarizing and paraphrasing so that the quotations aren't overtaking her. And then we've got a nice wrap up to this paragraph, as well as a transition into the next idea. Even with all the studies indicating that the link between homework and achievement is drastically overinflated, it's unlikely that homework's going away anytime soon, and perhaps for good reason. So the rest of this paragraph is going to be about those good reasons to keep homework. Okay, and that leads us to our conclusion. I want to talk about this conclusion for a minute. What I really love about this conclusion is that this writer is recapping that there's still a debate here. There's not a ton of agreement about the effects of homework. And then she talks about what could happen going forward. She's kind of setting us up for an expanded version of this paper, right? And talking about the possibilities for future exploration. So this is a cool thing you could do in your conclusion if you want to. Talk about where the debate seems to stand right now and what you could explore if you pick this paper later. It would be worthwhile to examine further positive impacts, so on and so forth. And then the works cited list starts on the next page. Okay, that's about all I wanted to say about this, but if you notice anything else or have questions about anything, there's a thread in our discussions where you can ask, and as always, you can send me an email too. I hope this paper is helpful. Remember, you don't have to write like this. You should not try to imitate everything about this paper. This is just one example of a successful exploratory essay. Take care, and I will see you in our discussion soon.